Greetings, good evening. Christ is risen. Welcome, welcome. We are happy you are here. Welcome to our event. Come on in, take a seat. We are happy you are here to our Meet the Author event. And we're going to be hearing from our very own Dr. Alexander Titus. If you have questions tonight, we do have a Q&A box at the very bottom, and you can ask questions through the Q&A box. And later on, we may also open up the mic for everyone if you want to ask a live question. But we are glad you're here. Welcome, and thank you for joining us for this Meet the Author event featuring the translator of St. Gregory Palamas's The Triads, a foundational work of Orthodox theology and spiritual life. Tonight, we'll explore the text, the translation process, and why this work continues to shape Christian thought centuries after it was written. We're grateful that you are here. We're grateful that Dr. Alexander Titus, our one and only and our own at St. Raphael School, or how I like to say, the man with two first names. And we're honored to have him as a guest with us. Our guest, whose work in patristic studies and translation has helped make the writings on the early church accessible to modern readers. The translation of the Triads is new, published by St. Vladimir's Press, brings clarity, depth, and scholarly precision to one of the most important theological texts of the 14th century. About our author, Dr. Alexander Titus is a learner, educator, translator, and church historian, specializing in the Byzantine and medieval Western periods. He holds a BA in Classics from the University of Oregon, an MA and THM from St. Vladimir's Theological Press,
Yeah.
Seminary, and a PhD in Church History from Princeton Theological Seminary. Wow. He is the translator of St. Gregory Palamas Triads. Dr. Titus has come to believe strongly in the salvific value of classical education, not only for the soul of the individual Christian, but for the building up of the whole church. Dr. Titus currently lives in Western Oregon with his wife and two sons. His other interests include cooking, literature, visual arts like film, animation, games, and volunteering in his local Orthodox community. Welcome, Dr. Titus. We are so glad you are here.
Thank you.
So Dr. Titus, why don't you start us off with telling us about this fantastic book? As you begin talking, I'm just gonna pull up the website where the book is on St. Vladimir's Press. Tell us about your book and anything you want to share.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Presbytera. So the triads is it's difficult in a lot of ways to summarize perfectly. And it's something that I myself sort of struggled with a little bit sort of as I was working on it. But I think as I not only read it and translated it, but also wrote about it for my doctorate, I think that it's really about one thing in particular, and that is the proper use and place of the mind in the spiritual life. That's really fundamentally what it's about. Because it's written as a response to other claims. And so it's kind of in that work of it's in that kind of apologetic style. It's written as a defense. It's right there in the title, the defense. That's the full title, the defense of the sacred or holy hesychast. It's kind of eclectic in that sense. It's sort of dealing with a bunch of different issues. It's dealing with knowledge. It's dealing with prayer. It's dealing with the doctrine of divinization, of how the Christian is transformed spiritually in this present life and in the age to come. But I think all of it kind of comes down to this understanding of, again, the mind in the spiritual life specifically. So, what is the mind for? What are the proper limits of knowledge and reading and sort of academic study? What is the proper use of the mind in prayer? That's a really big one. And what is sort of the proper orientation of the mind to the heart? That's another really big one. How do we kind of understand that? Uh, and then what is what does all of this have to do with, again, the goal of the Christian life, which he fundamentally defines as theosis or divinization. And basically, again, the mind, just like with the heart, with the body, is supposed to be engaged in this process of divinization. And so that's really what the triads, I think, is fundamentally about, if you can kind of boil it down to one thing. That's
What I love that what you said there is something about Saint Gregory Palamas, and maybe you can give us a little bit of a um, a background of, for those people who don't know, who Saint Gregory Palamas is. But definitely Saint Gregory Palamas at the time of when he led the church, he focused on this sense of prayer, individual and corporate prayer. But why don't you give us, for those who may be new to Palamas, who was he, and why then does he matter today to us?
absolutely. So, um, Gregory Palamas, he was born at the very end of the 13th century. We think somewhere 1296, 95, somewhere in there, in Constantinople. He was born into a fairly high, I don't know, I would say sort of high ranking or aristocratic family in Constantinople, the Palamas family. He, from a very young age, he was really, really drawn to the life. And again, I say not just the life in the church, but really fundamentally the life of prayer. He was uh, he did not really find himself very much at home in kind of the Constantinopolitan sort of hustle and bustle. He really thirsted for this contemplative life, this life of prayer, and so ultimately, he really moved kind of in that direction in his early life. At about the age of 18, we think maybe late, sort of early 20s, somewhere around there, he actually leaves Constantinople. His father sort of had expected him to become, some high-ranking member of the Constantinopolitan sort of administration, that kind of thing. That's kind of what he was groomed for. He had a really good education, but he in his late teens, again, late teens, early 20s, somewhere around there, he actually leaves and becomes a monk on the holy mountain of Athos. And so that was really where he kind of started his spiritual life. He kind of moves around sort of within the Athonite monastic world.
Mhm.
He really, I mean, his early life, I mean, in his 20s and 30s, he wasn't someone who was really a public figure. I mean, he kind of went there because he wanted to get away from kind of public life, sort of in that way. He just wanted to be kind of engaged in this life of prayer, of stillness. That, of course, he wrote to defend later in his life.
Mhm.
He wrote some things. He wrote a life of Saint Peter, the Athonite, for example. But it really wasn't until he was maybe in his late 30s or early 40s that he really kind of became a public figure. He was sort of drawn into controversy. And that controversy specifically had to do with the Hesychasts, who he had kind of been living among and with and sort of learning from on Mount Athos. There was a monk who came from southern Italy named Varlam, who really did not find he found certain problems, or so he thought, with kind of the way that the Hesychasts were praying in particular. He had all these ideas about how they were sort of deluding themselves and these kinds of things. Oh, these weirdos think that they can see some kind of light in their stomachs
Mm.
or something like that. What a weird thing. and and so Palamas, he's sort of through kind of various channels, he's kind of brought into this controversy, even though he didn't really go out seeking it. It kind of came to him. He engages with these debates with Varlam, sort of not only sort of in the Athonite world, but also in especially in Thessaloniki. He moves there for a little while to kind of engage with that, and that's really where kind of the triads. That's where the triads comes from. It's this group, and it's called the triads because it's a group of three. The Trinity,
Mhm.
Trinities, right? It's this group of groups of three treatises. So it's actually a total of nine treatises. That's what the triads ultimately. That's the historical context of where the triad sort of comes from, and the reason, like I said earlier, why it's so kind of eclectic, right? He's starting talking about sort of how pagan philosophy isn't really something that monks should be sort of spending a lot of their time with, and then he talks about prayer and sort of the position of prayer and all that kind of thing. And then he talks about sort of the experience of divine light and what that means. And then he ultimately talks about divinization. The reason for that is because it was actually Varlam who sort of wrote these treatises
Mhm.
on these various things that then he had to respond to. So that
Right.
was really kind of that's why when sometimes when you pick it up, you think, wait, why is he kind of talking about this? Why is he talking about this now? And you have to remember that it's a response to a group of writings that we no longer have. Varlam was ultimately condemned by the church, and Palamas was vindicated at a council in the early 1340s, and all of his anti-Hesychast works were destroyed.
Right.
So we don't actually know exactly what Barlaam said to sort of triangulate, but basically what we have is sort of Palamas's response, and so it has kind of an edge to it in certain respects. It has a kind of toughness to it that sometimes kind of surprises people. They're like, why is he being so harsh?
Yes.
And the reality is because he had to speak very clearly and very strongly. He tried to be kind of gentle in the beginning, but kind of as things progressed, he has to be more clear and more clear. And fundamentally, by the time the controversy sort of boiled into this church-wide sort of event, he realized that it wasn't just this disagreement about how you pray or whether or not you're allowed
Right.
to, whether or not monks should read like Homer or something like that. It was really fundamentally about what is the goal of the Christian life. And the goal of the Christian life, again, for Palamas, is divinization. And that's where, again, he develops his doctrine of essence and energies and that kind of thing. So that's really kind of the historical context. After the Hesychast controversy sort of ends, He's made the Archbishop of Thessaloniki, and then or Thessalonica as it was then called. He has a really interesting time that he spends in about a year in captivity and among the Ottoman Turks, and he writes all kinds of stuff. He has disputes with the Ottomans, theological disputes, which were very interesting. And we have a lot of this material. He writes a ton of letters. He continues to write homilies, and he ends his life as the Archbishop of Thessalonica. So sometimes he's called Gregory of
Mm.
Thessalonica. If anyone sort of encounters him that way, it's the same person. So that's kind of that's kind of an overview of Palamas.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Titus, because it then brings to mind, if the triads were written to correct misunderstandings about hesychasm within the time frame of the church that he lived, um, his distinction between essence and energies. How does it shape
Yeah.
the spiritual life? Because obviously that hasn't changed. And that's why it is so important for us to know these works of the fathers of the church, because these things are pertinent to our own spiritual journey to theosis, to oneness with God. So, how does Palamas' distinction between essence and energy shape our
Yeah.
spiritual life? What does he say within the triads?
Well, so basically, what he noticed was okay, everyone agrees, including Barlam, actually, everyone agrees that you can't sort of experience God in his essence. Everyone sort of agrees with that you can't, because to experience God in his essence is to become God sort of by nature.
Right,
And you're sort of
right.
become almost like a biological offspring of God, that kind of thing. So that's clearly not what the church means when the church talks about divinization, and uses these terms. But at the same time, you look through the tradition and you see that a lot of the fathers, they'll use this language of like experiencing the divine glory,
Yes.
experiencing the divine grace. I mean, there's a famous sort of almost a cliche, but it's very true that we are to become by grace what
Mm-hmm.
Christ is by nature. Again, what he is by
Mm-hmm.
nature. So we don't become what he is by nature. He is that by nature. We become that by
Mm-hmm.
grace. And so really the question is, what does that mean? Uh, what does that word grace actually mean?
Mm-hmm.
What does that word glory actually mean? What does adoption into sonship
Mm-hmm.
actually mean?
Right.
And so basically again he looks through the tradition and he sees, well, he grabs this word. It's really interesting. It was actually developed by Aristotle of all people, this word energia. Yeah, it
Mm-hmm.
was first kind of developed by Aristotle, and basically Aristotle used it in a very different way. Aristotle basically defined energia as like the the um the actuality of a power. So like basically you have the
Mm-hmm.
ability to do something, and then the energia is like the actualization of the power. But in the church tradition, uh these words energia and then dynamis on the other hand, energy and
Yep.
power, if you will, are sort of used almost interchangeably. That God has these powers, but they're not just sort of these ideas or attributes about it. They're not just conceptual. They're not just things that you can kind of say about God. Oh, God is good, or God is holy, or God is life, right? These kinds of things. Um, it's actually that God shares Himself with all of creation and
Mm-hmm.
offers not just he is not just holy himself, he offers holiness. He
Mm-hmm.
offers life. He offers immortality. Um, he offers his own light to the believers. And so, again, fundamentally, the doctrine of the energies is all trying to explain how we, by cooperating or synergizing
Mm,
with the energies, again, working together with those energies. So we're using our energies to cooperate with the divine energies, not by nature, but by
mhm.
energy. We are ultimately transformed into the divine likeness. So energies, the doctrine of the energies is basically simply a kind of an intellectual safeguard for the doctrine of divinization. It's really meant to explain how divinization works. It kind of, if you think about it this way, it's almost like guarding against two errors. On the one hand, I kind of already talked about this. It's guarding against this idea that we in divinization are going to become God by nature. And that's
Mhm.
clearly, again, people in the tradition have talked
Right,
about that. St. Maximus says, no, that's
right.
not how it works.
No.
The
Yes.
other error is that there's no contact with God whatsoever. That God sort of creates us and then sort of stands back and says, all right, you do you, I'll do me.
No.
That's obviously also not how it works. And so really the doctrine of the essence and energies is basically again trying to safeguard it's kind of guard against two sort of equal but opposite errors and sort of show how the process of divinization, deification, actually
Mhm.
actually can be real. It can be a real transformation of our lives, not just in the age to come, but in this present life. It starts now and sort of continues on into eternity and really never ends. It's really
Right.
endless because God Himself is endless. God
Beautiful.
Himself continues into eternity, and so our divinization process, it begins kind of in time, but in kind of a paradoxical way, ends up in eternity. That's really
Beautiful. Yes.
again that's really
And
the
this
doctrine. Yeah.
and if I recall properly, this he mentions the synergy as the key component, of course, to both of those misunderstood things. It's synergy that brings it to light. It's a synergy between us and God, and that synergy being love and the unconditional love that is free under free will that causes this to occur.
Yeah,
Now,
exactly.
um, one of the things I hope you can speak a little bit about is the uncreated light he mentions.
Hmm. Exactly. So you'll notice on the cover here we have a really nice sort of depiction of the transfiguration. There you Presbyter is gonna show it there on the transfiguration. And you notice Christ there in the center. Of course, he's flanked by the prophets Elijah and Moses. You have the chosen disciples, Peter, James, and John, sort of at his feet, and they're falling down because they're being sort of bombarded by this light. And so he really takes the transfiguration as kind of his sort of touchstone, if you will. It's really the event that sort of unlocks everything. And again, there's a long history of this going back
Mhm.
many centuries. A lot of people in sort of the Eastern Christian Greek speaking tradition have talked about the way that the transfiguration sort of works, what it is. If you look at, for example, St. John of Damascus, he writes
Yes.
uh, at least, I think, a couple homilies on the transfiguration. And he says very clearly that the transfiguration it's not some kind of like magic show. It's not like, look at the special effects, that sort of like, oh, Christ is putting on some kind of magic show. Actually, what's really happening at the transfiguration is Christ is kind of pulling down the veil.
Mhm.
He's pulling aside the veil just a little bit and he's letting through some of the light of the glory of who he truly is at that moment. He's showing himself, he's revealing himself to the disciples as what he really is. Now, the really interesting thing about this is that the light itself can only be seen by one who is pure of heart. So the light is not sort of available to, if you will, sort of historical eyes.
Mhm.
And so Palamas, he actually makes this comment that I think maybe scandalizes some people, but sort of makes sense when you think about it. He makes this comment several times that the passersby, or like the, the sheeps and goats, hanging out in the nearby fields at Mount Tabor, they wouldn't have seen anything. They would not have seen the uncreated light, because the uncreated light is only available to those who have had their hearts purified, at least in this life.
Mhm.
In the age to come, it's overwhelming.
Mhm.
It's going to be very obvious. But so really, the uncreated light is a it's a he talks about it as a symbol. But again, we have to be careful here, because we don't want to think of symbol as like the way that we use symbol now. Like, oh, symbol, there's something that represents something that is not what it is, basically. But he says that it's a symbol in the sense of a natural symbol. He says it's like the heat or the light of fire. That it actually is showing itself. It's a symbol fundamentally of that, of the divine glory of who God really is. And so the the reason why it's uncreated is because it is God himself fundamentally.
Right.
It's not some kind of, it's not a special effect, it's not a magic show, it's not a it's not some weird, like, change in the atmosphere. Barlam said that, oh, it's like, it was like God sort of made particles of light sort of appear kind of in the, the atmosphere or something like that. It's not anything like that. It has nothing to do with the clarity of the air. It has everything to do with the clarity of the heart. And so
Oh, say that. Oh, say that line
it
again.
has nothing to do with the clarity of the air, and everything to do with the clarity of the heart. And so it's the pure heart, only the pure heart that can see the uncreated light. And the reason why the pure heart sees the uncreated light, and again I use the word see, they
Mhm.
see it with their physical eyes. It's not just in their heart that they see it. They actually
Mhm.
see it with their
Mhm.
physical eyes. But the reason for that is that the body participates
Mhm.
in the heart. Again, it's not kind of a just a dualism here. It's not that, oh, there's the body kind of does its own thing over here, and the mind does its own thing over here, and the heart does its own thing over here. All of these realities, when properly integrated, actually have kind of a hierarchy. So it's almost like concentric circles. So the body
Mhm.
actually participates in this very process of divinization. And again, I mean, we all, we kind of know this intuitively, right? We're celebrating right now the resurrection. This is the resurrection. I mean, it's the participation of the body in the life of the spirit, if you will. The body is not excluded. And on prayer, it's like, why do we have this thing?
Mhm.
Why do we have this thing? It's not just a fidget. It's actually because in prayer, when you use this thing to say the prayer, you're actually involving your body
Right.
in the act of prayer, which he says is
Right.
fundamental. And so all of this stuff about breathing and heartbeats and all that kind of thing is actually really, really fundamental in the spiritual life. We cannot exclude the body. He even says things like, like fasting, the experience of feeling
Mhm.
hunger, um, having your feet hurt by standing in church for a long time. He actually mentions that explicitly, that that's actually part of the process of theosis involving the body.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what's going on with uncreated
Beautiful.
light.
Beautiful. And because you brought the Koboskini, the prayer rope, to light, and just for our audience members, if you do have a question, please feel free to use the Q&A box, or you can also put it in the chat box, and we'll answer questions that you may have. But because this ties in together, Dr. Titus, with prayer, he also highlights noetic prayer, prayer of the heart, the nous within the heart, within these writings as well. So could you rather touch a little bit upon that as well?
So, yeah, so the word nous, I translated as intellect in the text. Part of that was because I wanted some consistency between a whole family of other words. Sometimes it's easier in English to kind of just Latinize things. Although interesting, intellectus, another word that Aristotle invented, actually. Well, he invents the word intelligence in Greek, entelechia. Um, the word intellect, it there's basically a whole family of words that have to do with we might hear sometimes in English like noetic, that kind of
Mhm.
thing, right? No, you mentioned like noetic prayer, that kind of thing. And really what it is a an involvement, just like the body, right? So just like the body is involved in the prayer, the mind is involved in the prayer too, but not in the way that we might think. We often, especially nowadays, and this is also true for people like Varlam back then, we might think that the mind is simply a kind of calculator. The mind is there to kind of solve problems and to figure things out. But prayer is not a problem-solving activity. Prayer
Mhm.
is not a time for like doing intellectual sort of calculating, if you will. Prayer involves the mind, so it involves the attentiveness, but it's really it's not a kind of it's not the mind in terms of like thinking through something. It's the mind as that which receives and understands. And actually, even they're not without this in the Latin tradition. For example, Boethius, if you read the Consolation of Philosophy, yeah, Boethius makes a distinction between the intellectus, he Latinizes it, the intellectus, and the mind. He says that the intellect is what sort of is what understands, sort of truly, and so that involving the mind in prayer is absolutely essential to sort of the the real goal of prayer.
Mhm.
And Varlam's kind of mistake here is that he wanted to sort of he thought that it was okay for the monk in particular to kind of have a private intellectual life, to have a private intellectual life and then have like kind of a private prayer life, kind of, and never the two shall meet, basically. But
Mhm.
Palamas says no, you actually need to
Mhm.
take your intellect and put it into the prayer. But that means, because you can't do two things at the same time, that means you need to leave aside these other sort of intellectual energies and engage with prayer. And so prayer he defines fundamentally as an energy on our part, right? Prayer is an energy. It's not just an attitude. It's not just a belief. It's not just kind of a state of mind. It's actually it's actually praying. It's actually saying the prayer. And he defines it as an energy, which is again really really interesting. So you have both the uncreated light, as understood as an energy, and prayer, understood
Mhm.
as an energy. And so again, the synergy comes together in
Yes.
the two of them, that you have working together, right? The prayer works together with God to access the uncreated light. And again, it's not at all it's not at all surprising, I should say. It's completely unsurprising that those who are very advanced in this can see with their physical eyes the this uncreated light, because again their body is participating in this in the same way that he talks about the incorrupt relics of saints.
Hmm.
Their bodies are participating in the reality of divinization. They've been even in the state of quote unquote death, you know, um, they are what appears to be death anyway. They uh, these these incorrupt saints are we can see a physical sort of remnant, an outward external remnant of that inward reality. So it doesn't exclude the body and it doesn't exclude the mind. Yeah.
Beautiful. So we've been talking, of course, about the triads. For someone encountering the triads for the first time, what would you recommend as an entry point?
Well, probably read my introduction. That would probably be helpful. The introduction is very long, but I I put a lot in the introduction. And so what I don't like to do, and I did this for a very particular reason. What I don't like to do is kind of do footnotes as kind of running commentary. My footnotes are extremely sparse, so I'm generally not helping anyone understand things in the footnotes. I'm just giving references. But the introduction is fairly comprehensive. Now, as far as the text itself goes, it's actually really interesting if you look at, for example, the Greek Philokalia.
Hmm.
The Greek Philokalia actually highlighted specifically the second treatise of the first triad, the on the treatise on prayer. And that is completely fine to read on its own. It's probably, if you want something that's most accessible, that's probably where to start. I generally like to say if I were to have anyone read just a part of this and sort of get a big picture of sort of what's going on the whole, sort of like almost like kind of a microcosm, like the triads in miniature, I would actually say to read the second, excuse me, to read the third treatise of the second triad. It's actually the longest treatise by far. It's very, very long, but it basically does everything. It does the knowledge stuff. It does the prayer stuff. It does the uncreated light. It does the, the energies. It does
Hmm.
divinization. It does kind of everything that the triads as a whole does, but kind of in miniature. So that's kind of a good place to go as well. Definitely. But it's yeah, it's yeah, there are a few different ways of kind of going into it, but that's definitely what I would say.
Thank you. We have a question, but before I ask that question, um, and we, kind of move away from what we've been talking about, are there passages, or ideas that you personally find especially moving or spiritually rich as you were doing this work that you kind of really pondered, looked back on, and still, um, still find yourself, I can't find the word, um, replaying or readdressing or deeply thinking and reflecting upon.
Definitely, definitely. There's one in particular, and what's funny is I come across it and I can never actually remember the exact the exact citation, although I did find it in the introduction. It's it okay, that's what I thought. It's very it's the 18th chapter of the third treatise of the first triad. So 1.3.18. And I actually, because I remember specifically because I quoted it in the introduction. And there's one particular uh, little bit of that I really found kind of compelling, and this is kind of ever since I was working on my ever since I read this for my dissertation. Uh so let me read a little bit of it. He says, "For after every intellectual energy has ceased, which of the angels, not to mention the angels, men who are equal to angels, sees God except by the power of the Spirit? It is for this reason that while their vision is not a sensation, since they do not receive it into themselves by way of sense perceptions," he's talking about the angels here, "it is also not an intellection, since they do not receive it by way of thoughts or the knowledge derived from them. Rather, they discover it in accordance with a cessation of every intellectual energy.
Mm.
The vision is absolutely not an imagination, nor a thought, nor an opinion,
Mhm.
nor some kind of conclusion reached from syllogisms. Nor does the intellect achieve this vision through apophatic assent alone. For every, and this is the part that I really like, for every divine commandment and every sacred law is bound by purity of heart. Every
Mm.
mode and every form of prayer comes to an end at the boundary of pure prayer, following the saying of the fathers. And every word, as it rises up from below to him who is far removed and free from everything, comes to a standstill at the boundary
Mm.
of its separation from all beings." I
Mm.
really like that. Like every divine
Mm.
commandment and every sacred law is bound by purity of heart. So basically, there's a purpose and a limit to um, to all this stuff. I really like that, how he's kind of pointing to this 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 vision, really fundamentally this vision of God as the fundamental reality that everything else is kind of pointing to. Anyway,
Beautiful.
I really like the way he puts it.
Beautiful. Just beautiful. Um, Questions. And let's start off.
All right.
Um, Tony said, "Thank you both for the discussion and translation. Small biographical question. Some people have said St. Gregory Palamas and St. Nicholas Cavasilas knew each other and were on the same side of the hesychast debate. Others say, sorry, I have to move my mouse here. Others say they had similar positions but did not know each other interact. Um, have you found anything to suggest a relationship or awareness of St. Gregory's part of St. Nicholas or vice versa?"
Yeah, I actually read that on Wikipedia too. Like, there's just something. Um, I have not been able to confirm that one way or another in my own research. It's a particularly interesting question to me because I actually just in next week actually I'm going to start reading Saint Nicholas Cavasilis's The Life in Christ
Yeah.
with some of my students. So it's actually a really interesting question to me. When I read the two of them, I don't see any like incompatibility for sure.
Mm.
But I also haven't seen any evidence that they actually had any interaction with each other. Nicholas Cavasilis actually he writes he's younger than Palamas. They overlapped a little bit, but he's like a generation or so younger. Like he lives up through the very end of the 14th century. His father, Nilos, was somewhat involved in the Hesychast controversy as sort of a minor figure. But I don't know about Saint Nicholas. I've not been able to find any obvious sort of evidence one way or another. I think that there's kind of an interesting thing. Well, it's kind of an interesting thing, especially in kind of our like hyper connected age. Like we just assumed that everybody knew each other like at all times, right? Like oh, people were like really, you were well connected. But there's just these kind of weird things like that. Like for example, there's a huge question about whether Saint Gregory Palamas and Saint Gregory of Sinai actually knew each other. Some people say they definitely did. Some people say they didn't. So, but what's weird is that if they didn't, then they were living, then the two of them, from the fact they're both named Gregory, were both living on Mount Athos at the same time, basically writing about the exact same things. And
Hmm.
it's kind of interesting that they wouldn't have known each other, but again, you got to think like this is this is the 14th century. Like, things don't travel nearly as quickly as they do now. So there are just these kind of interesting things where it's I'm not sure one way or another, but it's entirely possible where just some people just didn't have any kind of interaction. And so I really, yeah, I wish I had a more kind of definite answer to that about Saint Nicholas, but I'm really not entirely sure. I haven't seen Nicholas did not leave us a whole lot of writing, so it's actually not super easy to say one way or another. But I see a really strong like compatibility between the two. And I actually think St. Nicholas's writings, especially on the Divine Liturgy and on the sacraments and the life of Christ, are really actually a very, very beautiful like complement to Palamas, for sure. Yeah.
Thank you. Great answer. Now, of course, we have some of your students and some want to be your students soon in our attendees, and they have some questions.
I see
So,
that.
one is, what exactly was it about the triads that made you choose to translate it? Why the triads? Why not another book by Saint Gregory Palamas or even a different author?
Yeah. As uh Lisvita is getting some personal stuff here. So yes, it's a really good question. I well, when I was first kind of getting interested, I not even say orthodoxy, but sort of Christianity in general, I I encountered this text. It was Nicholas Gendel's translation that was done in the early 1980s. By that was published. It's the orange one. If you guys are familiar with that, that's the one that most people are familiar with. And I was just I was just blown away, even though it was like super abridged. Like it was like maybe a quarter of the text was in that translation. I was just really blown away by the way that Palamas kind of addresses again, the kind of things that I've been talking about here, but really addresses the proper use of the intellect in the spiritual life. Because I myself, I think, was one of those people who really just read and studied, very much an academic, very much an intellectual, kind of read and studied my way sort of into things. And I think he just spoke to me in, again, just me personally in this really profound way, sort of showing me the way forward and also kind of the dangers of sort of over intellectualizing things kind of in the way that we've been talking about, sort of thinking about the spiritual life as a kind of like a purely sort of intellectual like problem, if you will. So um when I was received into the church, I took Greg, or maybe he took me as his patron saint. Um, so he's kind of, so Palamas is already my sort of heavenly patron, although he's, now he's kind of my academic patron as well. He's sort of patronizing my professional life as well. But I think like as far as the translation itself goes, it was something that I was familiar, I was familiar with the text, kind of that older text that came out in the 1980s. And I was just like, I was always just a little disappointed that it was so abridged. Like I had no, I mean, people think that it's like this short thing. It's not. I mean, you saw the book. Like, I mean, it's this, it's not short. And I was just like, why do we not have all of this? Like, this seems really important that we should have this in English translation. There's a French translation that Meyendorff did, and there was an Italian translation actually as well. But it just seems weird that we don't have an English translation. So I was kind of finishing up my THM actually at St. Vladimir's Theological Seminary. And I kind of been playing around with translating some other things, some shorter texts. I was looking at like a text from St. Maximus that didn't end up kind of going anywhere because there was another bid for that and that kind of thing. And so uh, I had this thought, this inspiration. I was like, well, why don't I just try? I mean, there's the triads. Like, why don't I just try just starting translating it? And it, I was talking with Father John Bear, who is both the dean and the professor of patristics and the editor, the series editor of the Popular Patristics series at the time. And I had him as a professor for many years before then. And I just said, what if, like, I know this thing with St. Maximus didn't work out, but what about the triads? Like, could you guys publish that as part of is it patristic? I don't even it's like 14th century, how patristic is it? And he was like, "Yeah, that'd be great. We'll get you a contract." I
Hmm.
was like, "There we go." So it was really so I started working on the translation, and that was right at the beginning of my doctoral work at Princeton Theological Seminary, just down the road. No, not just down there. It's like an hour and a half away from New York. Um, but I I knew I kind of had this thing. I was like, okay, so I've got this contract to translate the triads, and I was supposed to have it done in like 2 years. It ended up taking like four, but I was supposed to have it done in 2 years. COVID happened and a bunch of others, of course, and so I had this thing, but I was like, well, I need to. I'm in the doctorate program, so once I'm done with my coursework for my doctorate, like I need to propose my dissertation. And I was starting to get really worried because I'm like, how am I going to work on my dissertation and work on the translation at the same time? Like these are like really, major undertakings. And so, but I thought, well, what if I make my dissertation about the triads? That seems like kind of solving that problem. And so then it just kind of clicked, and my doctoral committee was really on board with it. They thought it was a great idea. Everyone was really happy. I had the contract and everything like that. So it all just kind of came together in um, just this really kind of amazing, miraculous way that I was able to work on the translation really almost like full time for a couple years. And then once I had that done, it was, I mean, as anyone who, has worked on a lot of text knows, it's really nice to have it digitized so you can just copy and paste. So it's like I didn't have to like type out everything from a book like into my dissertation. So I now had the entire text. I had it digitized, and I was very easily, once I had the whole translation basically done, I was then able to write my entire dissertation like within I basically like less than 9 months. I basically finished
Beautiful.
a chapter of my dissertation like once a month, like once every like maybe month and a half, just because I had translating a text like I was so familiar with it
Right.
that it just like I was able to, of course, do like, do searches, because it was all digitized and everything. Like, oh, where was that? Let me find it, that kind of thing. So, it actually, yeah, it came together in this really, yeah, this really, really kind of amazing way, both the translation and the dissertation, but the translation came first. Is
Beautiful.
that what
I
Nicole
think
is
that's what
asking
Nicole
there?
is saying. This is the part I was wondering about. Which came first?
The
So
translation or the dissertation?
dissertation, the translation came first, then the dissertation.
Yes, correct. Well,
Or
well, the
you were working on your
translation, yes.
dissertation.
The
It was
translation was
synergy. It was
it was
synergy,
synergy,
Dr.
absolutely,
Titus.
absolutely. um Yeah, no, absolutely. So it was actually I was working on the translation already. But I wasn't doing like I didn't do a ton of work on it. Well, because I was still in coursework and everything like that. Like I was able to work on it a little bit in the summer and like I presented a paper on it like at a conference and that kind of thing. But it was really like it was already underway, the translation. But what's interesting is my dissertation was actually, well, I should say this. My dissertation was published before this was published. Let me put it that way. So I actually finished the translation. I think I delivered the translation in, I think, 2022. So that was actually the same, I think it was actually the same month that I got that I actually graduated with my doctorate. I finished the translation. I sent it off to St. Vladimir's. I sent them the introduction, everything like that. Um, and then, of course, it had a long process of editing to go through, as you can imagine, just because it's so massive. And they, I mean, they launched this whole an entirely new imprint. The longer works. I mean, it's
Beautiful.
LW1. There we go. You know,
Yes.
for the Popular Patristics. So this is
You
like the launch
launched a
title.
whole new series
Yeah.
for St. Vladimir Seminary Press.
Because normally, I mean, St. Vlad, I mean, you take a look at the difference. You know, this is what you know, this is what they
Right.
normally look like. You know, this is quite a bit more substantial.
So, Jackie is asking the question, another student, will we read this book in any of our literature classes? Now, fun fact for you adults in the room, we did have a triads class for the adults right before, well before it
Yeah.
got officially published. So inquiring minds want to know, Dr. Titus, including the principal of St. Raphael's
Yes.
School, will we have read this book in a literature class or possibly in a separate class?
I did think about that. I did think about that with the adult classes. Um, I I yeah, I struggle with this a little bit, you know, having it because it is quite difficult actually of a text. And I do have a well, I have a part of my syllabus that may or may not actually come to fruition in the not in the literature class, but actually in the history class. That where we do read a bit of Palamas's. Well, we actually read the entirety of Palamas's Hagioritic tome, and
Mm-hmm.
the Hagioritic tome is
Mm-hmm.
really basically a very like condensed version of his theological argument that's in
Mm-hmm.
the tri. It's actually in the Philokalia. Um, and the problem with it is that if we read we'd have to read some kind of selection,
Right.
and because we would basically, I mean, well, I could offer it and see if anyone takes it. You know, let's spend
Oh,
the
I'm sure
entire
people would
class.
take
They
it.
have to let's spend the entire class on just the triads because it would really take an entire year
Yes,
long class to
that's
read the
what I'm
whole thing.
saying. It would be
Yeah.
the whole
It would
class.
be the whole, yeah, it would be the whole year just doing this. And then we'd probably just barely get through it. Well, I don't know. It's like it looks bigger than it is because it's Greek and English, but it's like 350 pages. So it's like, you know, but it's really dense. It's really dense and difficult. Um, so yeah, I have to think about it. It's not something that I have found like an obvious way to do, but it's definitely it's not completely outside of the realm of possibility
You heard
for
it
sure.
here first, people. He said maybe. And in my book,
He said a
that's a
maybe,
strong
a strong maybe.
almost to be.
There we go.
Well,
Definitely.
this has been a wonderful, wonderful evening. I would be remiss if I didn't say that Dr. Titus, and I'm just going to pull this up, teaches many classes at St. Raphael's School. If you go to our website and you search for Dr. Alexander Titus and scroll down, you will see all the classes that he teaches for the summer upcoming and for the fall, including Greek, of course, liberal arts levels 6, 7, and 8. For the summer, he is teaching two fabulous classes, Film Critics Club, as you can see here, that's being held in between from June to July. And then he's also doing a summer book club on C.S. Lewis's Perry Landra. That's also happening from June to July. So as you can see, our beloved Dr. Titus is a wonderful wealth of information, a great storyteller, a wonderful inspiration to us all for bringing this work, the translation, which we didn't even get to about the translation and how you went about translating from the Greek to the English. That'll have to be a part two to our Meet the Author series. Maybe something you and I do, and we can put it together for this video. But we can't thank you enough for being here and, of course, for sharing the work on St. Gregory Palamas and the Triads. Do you have any closing remarks, Dr. Titus?
Well, just thank you. Thank you, Presbytera.
No, no other remarks?
No, I think that's it. Thank you everyone for being here. Thank you for taking my classes. That's
They're
I
amazing
hope I hope
classes
I hope
every
you
time I
take
go.
I hope you take many more of them. Yeah, everyone. So yeah, thank you. Oh,
You're welcome. You're welcome. And thank you. Thank you again, Dr. Titus, for your insight, your scholarship, your dedication to making the Fathers accessible to today's readers. And thank you to everyone who joined us this evening. We hope this conversation inspires you to explore the triads more deeply and to continue engaging with the rich tradition of our Orthodox theology. Christ is risen.
truly is risen.
Truly he is risen. Christ has trampled down death by death, into those in the tombs he has bestowed life. Have a wonderful evening, everyone. God bless you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.